Wow, what a relief. It is so wonderful to welcome the champion of Russian democracy, a person who's been in the forefront of the human rights struggles in his own country, as well as being an inspiration for so many people around the world, a person who has called out Mr. Putin's war in Ukraine for what it is, a person who has been truly a hero to all of us. Welcome back to freedom, Vladimir Kara-Murza. We want you to know that if you were listening to when the applause started, it started when your wife walked into the room. She has been the leader here on behalf of you when you were in prison. Evgenia, thank you for your extraordinary leadership. If you ever want to go into a battle, you want to have your wife on your side. She has led the battle here, and we thank you very much. Today is a day of celebration, but we would be remiss if we did not, at the same time, tell that there's a lot more that we need to do. So many people are being held in Russia because they're standing up for democracy. And we can never forget their struggles. So many people are fighting for a free media, for the ability to speak about freedom and democracy. And we must never forget those individuals. As chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and as the co-chair of the Helsinki Commission, it's great to have Senator Wicker with us, who's been one of our champions on all of these issues in the Helsinki Commission. It is important that we do everything we can to strengthen the tools that we have available to us. Yes, it started with the Magnitsky sanctions, which we made it clear that we were going to hold the individuals responsible in Russia for their violations of human rights, since the Russian Federation would not do so. And we're pleased that U.S. leadership allowed other countries to show similar courage in Europe, UK, and Canada. But we need more tools. We need more strength. And we're working, Vladimir, I want you to know, on additional resources and tools to help those that are struggling today through these repressive regimes. And we're going to continue to do that. But I want to take you back to April, because we were in this room in April. And Evgenia was here saying we had to put a spotlight on you. Didn't take much to convince us, because we knew you. We have been with you for a long time. I was with you when you made the decision that you were going to return to Russia. I have my doubts about you returning to Russia. But you were determined to not be deterred by the oppression of the regime and to speak on behalf of the millions of Russians that depended upon you. That day, we all wrote letters. And I have a copy of the letter that I wrote that I'm going to give you a copy of. I also have a pile of the letters that were written, the originals of some of these letters. We want you to know what people were saying back in April to get you released. I have a letter I'm going to give you welcoming you home. It's a lot more fun to write that letter than the other letters. I have a resolution that was passed by the United States Senate to call for your release. We want you to know that we are proud to be on your team. You told me in the ante room, said thank you. And I told you that's not necessary. We thank you, because our protests are done in a country that allows us to speak our views without fear of being poisoned or arrested. That was not your case. We thank you for giving us hope. Hope that the Russian Federation will one day be free. hope that we will be able to make progress. You live by the motto of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that each one of us can make a difference in this world. By working together, we can bring about change. You have done that as an individual, and you have brought us together to make this world a better place. So let me invite my colleagues up as we make the presentations, if I might, of our letters and our resolutions. A beautiful resolution, by the way. Personally signed. But please come up. My colleagues from the House and Senate come up. Senator Coons, he's there. I didn't see. We got Senator Coons, Congressman. Senator Whitehouse coming up. Senator Shaheen.
Wonderful. Bravo.
Congressman.
So wonderful to see you again. Thank you.
So wonderful.
Thank you.
Congressman coming up. It's a Senate resolution, but we invite House members. It's all right.
Should Mrs. Kara-Murza be invited?
Oh,
Oh,
yes,
sir,
I think
I'm sorry.
that's
Come on
great.
up.
Yeah. What a good idea.
All right. Somebody got a good one?
And now let me invite up our hero of the day, the person who has really motivated all of us, Vladimir Kara-Murza.
Mr. Chairman, Senators, members of the House, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, the word surreal doesn't even come close to describing what I feel now. Just a few weeks ago, sitting in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison in Siberia, and now standing among so many friends in the halls of the United States Congress. When I was in prison, my favorite time of day was about 4 p.m., which was when the prison guard would open the small feeding slot in the door of the cell and hand me the pack of my daily letters. And it was so important to be receiving those letters from so many good people around Russia and all around the world, because it really helps you survive, for the lack of a better term, in those conditions. And I remember very well that day in April when the stack of letters was much thicker than usual. And it was because my friends and my colleagues, the Free Russia Foundation, took all the notes and all the letters that were left by the wonderful people who took part in this event that Senator Cardin was just referring to, translated them all into Russian, because to go through the official prison correspondence system, only Russian language obviously is allowed. And they sent it all to me through this mailing system which people use to write prisoners. And I didn't have too many reasons to smile while I was in there, but I smiled a lot on that day. No words in any language that I know can describe the sense of gratitude that I feel for your letters, for your warm words, for your solidarity, for your support, for all the resolutions and statements and floor speeches, for everything you've done to support me and to stand with my family and with my wife, my partner, my best friend, Evgenia. No words can begin to describe that, so I won't try to think of anything fancy, and I just want to say from the very bottom of my heart, thank you. Thank you for everything. You are the reason that I'm standing here. You are the reason that 16 people, 16 human souls, were saved from the hell of Putin's gulag in that exchange last month. Because whatever the cynics and the skeptics will tell you, advocacy works, and public attention protects, and public attention saves. And as we have seen yet again last month, but we had seen this so many, many times before in our history, public opinion in the free world, at the end of the day, is more powerful than any dictatorship can ever hope to be. And beyond the personal gratitude, I want to thank all of you for standing in solidarity with all the political prisoners in Russia. We have more than 1,300 today, and those are only the official figures that are known, according to the publicly available statistics. In my own time, you know, in the Stolypin carriages and transit prisons, while I was in that system, I've seen so many people whose names are not on any publicly available lists, who are not being talked about by human rights organizations, who are not, you know, being mentioned in congressional resolutions, but they're in prison for a social media post, or because they stood up with a placard against the war in Ukraine, or because they just stood up with a blank sheet of paper. We have cases like this too, but people know why they were there, so they're put in prison too. Just yesterday, a man was given a 5-year prison sentence by the Moscow City Court, the same court that handed me my sentence last year, for responding to a survey on the street when a journalist came up to him and asked what he thought about the war in Ukraine. He said what he thought about it. He didn't think too well of it. He's got 5 years in prison yesterday for responding to a pollster. And I hope people keep that fact in mind when, you know, sometimes we still hear, and I still hear from some journalists asking me, well, why do opinion polls show such high support for Vladimir Putin? How people remember that. Somebody got 5 years in prison for responding honestly to an opinion poll question. But there are so many people in Russian prisons today who are there for the only reason that they have opposed, publicly opposed, Putin's murderous war of aggression. It's the fastest growing segment on Russia's political prisoner list, the opponents of the war in Ukraine. And so when I thank you for your solidarity with me and with all the others who were on that plane to Ankara last month, I also thank you in a much wider sense for your solidarity with all of them, with everybody who's still left behind. Because now that I have been saved from there, and the only way I can think of it is as a miracle, because I was certain I was going to die in that Siberian prison. But now that I've been saved from there, every morning I wake up and every night I go to bed thinking about all those who are still left back in Russia's modern-day gulag, back in Putin's prisons. And I'm not going to relent and rest or stop until we get the others out too. And I hope that we can continue working together with you to speak out, to advocate, and to help rescue and help save all of the people who are still left behind. And in an even wider sense than only the political prisoners, I took your letters and your messages and all the resolutions and the statements and the floor speeches as a very powerful gesture of solidarity with all of those people in Russia, not just those who are in prison, but those who are outside, who feel the same way that I do and that my colleagues do, who want Russia to become a normal, modern, democratic European country, who oppose Putin's murderous, corrupt, and aggressive regime, who oppose his criminal and aggressive war against Ukraine. Putin's propaganda wants the whole world to think that such people do not exist, that everybody in Russia supports Putin, that everybody in Russia supports the war, and that those of us who don't are just some kind of a small, marginal minority, or Western-paid stooges, hence all our convictions for high treason and so on. But I know that that propaganda line is a fake. And I know my country better than that. I know it from the thousands of letters that I would receive in prison every month from all over Russia, from people I'd never met, from cities and towns I'd never been to, some of them I hadn't even heard of. People who took time and who were not afraid to register their names, their addresses, their bank accounts in this official prison correspondence system, writing to me and expressing how they felt. That's an act of courage in itself in such a rigid dictatorship as our country has lived under for the past quarter of a century. I know my country better from the tens of thousands of people who have turned up in February of this year for these spontaneous outbursts of commemoration for Alexei Navalny after he was murdered in prison on Putin's orders. I'll never forget how, just a few days after Alexei was killed, my lawyer came to see me on his weekly visit. And as you know, I was sort of brought by the prison guards to this small, tiny room with a window, and he would come in and sit on the other side. And before we'd even start talking about any of the legal stuff, he said to me, you know, you wouldn't believe it, I was just driving here to see you. And I passed the main square in Omsk. This is where I was, a city in western Siberia. And there was just a mountain of flowers that came out of nowhere, just appeared overnight from people who came to pay their respects to Alexei Navalny. And when his funeral procession took place in Moscow, tens of thousands of people took part, despite knowing that there will be police officers and FSB agents with cameras and everybody's name will be taken, everybody's face will be recorded. Moscow is now completely full of these face recognition devices. People still went. People were saying goodbye to their loved ones that morning because they didn't know whether they would come back home or not, but they still went. Tens of thousands of people, mostly young people. I know my country better for the hundreds of thousands of people who, in February of this year, during our so-called presidential election campaign, waited in hours-long lines all over the country, in cities and towns large and small, to sign the petitions to get the sole anti-war candidate on the ballot, Boris Nadezhdin, a lawyer and a former member of parliament. The only guy who had the courage to come forward and say, I'm against this war, I'm going to end it. And you should have seen the public reaction. All my letters in February were about those lines. And of course he was not allowed on the ballot, but that was almost beside the point. Because as one young lady wrote to me from the town of Novorossiysk in the south of Russia on the Black Sea, she wrote to me, she described how she had to wait for 2 or 3 hours in that line, and it's a relatively small town. And she was sort of just, didn't have enough words to express how she felt. And she ended that letter by saying, I didn't realize how many of us there are. Because the Putin propaganda wants people like us to feel demoralized and isolated and feeling alone. And frankly, feeling that we do not exist. That's the Kremlin propaganda line, that everybody in Russia is for Putin and for the war. And I'm so deeply grateful to all of you for recognizing this lie and for not going along with it. Because having been on the inside, I can tell you how important it is to receive those words of support and solidarity from the free world. We are coming up next year to the 50-year anniversary of the start of the Helsinki process, which you know a thing or two about, Senator. So Senator Wicker, so do many people in this room. And Kyle Parker, I'm looking at you too. You know a thing or two about that as well. '50-year anniversary coming next year. And among the sort of chief pillars of the Helsinki process to me was that it established as an inalienable part of international relations the principle that respect for human rights and democratic principles on the one hand and international peace and international security on the other hand are inextricably and fundamentally linked. And I think this is a principle that we should speak about more often because it remains as true today and as indispensable today as it was half a century ago. I'm firmly and fundamentally convinced, always have been, but never as strongly as I am now, that the only way we will be able to achieve long-term peace, stability, security, and democracy on the European continent will be with a peaceful, free, and democratic Russia as a part of that equation. When that day comes, that will not just be in the interests of us Russian citizens, that goes without saying, but I'll be very much in the interest of Ukraine, of Belarus, of all our neighbors in Europe, and of the entire world, including here in the United States. I'm firmly and fundamentally convinced that the only way we will ever see Europe whole, free, and at peace with itself will be with a free, peaceful, and democratic Russia. I'm not just an optimist by nature, but I'm a historian by my background and my education, and I have to say that really helped in prison too. I have absolutely no doubt that that day when we will see a free, peaceful, and democratic Russia will come, and I very much look forward to working together with all of you in this room and outside, to work together with you to try to bring that day just a little closer. I thank you very much from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
We look forward to visiting Russia with you that day when it's free. I know that Senator Shaheen will arrange a codel so we all can get there at that time. And I thank you very much. Thank you. And let me I'm going to turn it over in one moment to Secretary O'Brien. I know a lot of my members would like, a lot of the members of the House and Senate would like to send their regards. So we're going to let Secretary O'Brien call on our other members that are here. But I just really want to give a shout out to the Biden administration and Secretary O'Brien. This was not an easy transaction for the release of the 6 prisoners, the 6 prisoners of conscience. And it involved work with other countries and other missions. Some are present here today. And I just really want to thank the international community and the leadership of the Biden administration for making this a reality. It has been a priority of the Biden administration. It's been a priority, a bipartisan priority here in the United States Congress. And so, Secretary O'Brien, with our thanks, please come up and decide who you're going to call on next among my colleagues so that you take their wrath rather than me on the order that you select them.
Quite a group you have here. Welcome home. Evgenia. Good work. I don't have a presentation to make to you, but on behalf of President Biden, Secretary Blinken, and everyone in the administration who worked for your release and those of the other prisoners of conscience, I do have a promise. We're not going to stop working on behalf of those who are detained unjustly. And we're not going to forget the purpose of this cause. So while it's great to be here to celebrate you coming home and to celebrate the others who have been freed, we're going to continue the work so that those who are not yet freed get to taste freedom. And we're also going to remember those who can never be freed, the ones who've died in detention or died because they were denied the essential medical care. You mentioned Alexei Navalny, but others as well. So that work will continue. Because what's at stake, we talk about values and it sort of becomes meaningless, but what's at stake is just the ability of people to speak their minds and to understand how many of each other there are, the freedom of association to come together. And it's all an effort by political leaders like Vladimir Putin to escape accountability. So speaking on behalf of the US government, we have a lot of tools to enforce accountability, and I promise we will use those. And just a special note of thanks to Vladimir. You gave us one of the main tools that we used to focus our advocacy for your freedom in the Global Magnitsky Act. And your work on that, I'm sure you didn't do it as a tool for yourself, but your work on that has helped us enormously as we work to free prisoners in the Western Hemisphere, in other countries around the world. So I hope you take pride, not just some joy in how it helped you, but pride in what it's already helped us do and the way it has helped our machinery be focused on the need to bring others out. And we will continue to pursue their freedom as we work. We have the occasion, as you say, next year in the 50th anniversary of the Helsinki Final Act, and we will make use of that to pursue freedom for cases around the world so that people can speak their minds and know how many people share their values. I'm going to close. That should be the applause line. But I'm going to close by just noting this was not the act of one or two people. It was an act of many governments, of many people. A lot of you here, please, I thank all of you for advocating relentlessly for Vladimir and for the others. I want to pass on two other thanks to our international colleagues from the other countries that were involved in Slovenia, Germany in particular, and others who contributed to making this work. This took a lot of people in a lot of governments, some of whom will never be known, working on behalf of these cases. And that's how we have to pursue these going forward. And finally, I want to thank all of the senators and members who are part of this effort. It is incredibly helpful when you're working inside the administration to know how strongly held the support for freedom is up here. And the more that is done, even when we can't be fully, good in answering all the requests, it's incredibly helpful. And I especially want to thank Chairman Cardin for all the work that you've done through your career to create the conditions and the structures that we use to bring people home and to celebrate the values in the Helsinki Final Act. So with that, I want to thank all of you, and I think the next round of applause should be for everybody in the room and all the work that we did together.
You have the order of priority?
Assistant Secretary O'Brien, thank you very much, not only for your leadership, but for all of those in the administration working on extraordinary diplomacy to make this happen. I'm Damon Wilson. I'm the President and CEO of the National Endowment for Democracy. I'm also going to lightly facilitate our conversation today. Ladies and gentlemen, we began, and you heard Vladimir, you heard the voice of a free Russia. And it's extraordinary, perhaps even unbelievable, to have him back here with us. But when you hear that voice, you can believe in a free Russia. So at the Endowment, we defend freedom and we support democracy around the world. And we do so with congressional backing, supporting nearly 2,000 of the bravest, most innovative partners around the world in more than 100 countries, all of whom are striving to build their own version of a normal, peaceful, democratic nation that Vladimir describes when he envisions his future Russia. And as Senator Cardin mentioned earlier this year, we gathered here under very difficult circumstances. 2 years had passed after Vladimir's arrest. Concern about his deteriorating health punctuated the urgent calls for him to flee, for calls to free him. And his wife, Evgenia, along with Natalia Arnaud from the Free Russia Foundation and many others in this room and around the world, they were told no many times over the last 2.5 years. Many of you were told that there was nothing to be done. There was no possibility of a swap. The Russian political prisoners could not be included in exchange if the possibility somehow for one arose. And yet everyone here, Evgenia, you first, remained undeterred. Perseverance matters. Coalitions matter. Extraordinary diplomats matter. Democratic allies matter. And the work to ensure that political prisoners are not forgotten matters. So we're here today to celebrate and honor Vladimir's release and his reunion with his family. But we know there are so many others that remain behind bars in Russia and Belarus, thousands who have bravely stood up to the dictatorships both of Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko. And Vladimir, you've spoken of these individuals and how they give you renewed hope for democracy in your own country, because as you said, they chose freedom by speaking out. So today is an opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to the political prisoners of the Kremlin. Let us use today to reaffirm our commitment to their belief that a free and democratic Russia is possible. And let us use today to reaffirm our commitment to help Ukraine defeat Putin. And with that, Senator Cardin, thank you for hosting us here, for hosting us in the Foreign Relations Committee, for your steadfast leadership on these issues, from Vladimir's advocacy to the Magnitsky Act to standing by the pro-democracy Russian movement. I now want to turn and invite Senator Roger Wicker to come to the stage. Actually, we'll move on. Senator Jeanne Shaheen. We're going to turn to Senator Jeanne Shaheen to offer remarks. Senator Shaheen is the chair of the Europe Subcommittee of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, as you heard, someone who will lead a CODEL to a freed Russia. She's been chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group, and she hosted Vladimir in conversation at the Endowment during the first Summit of Democracy when he was here with us in Freedom. Senator Shaheen, please.
Thank you very much, Damon. I'm also very proud to be one of the members of Congress and the senators who is denied access to a visa in Russia by Putin. So, but, you know, only a senator or a member of Congress would have the chutzpah to stand up and speak after Vladimir Kara-Murza, a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, when he was in prison. But I'm going to do it because I want to take this opportunity to say welcome home and to thank Evgenia. You know, one of my favorite quotes, Vladimir, was that when you were released, you stated that everything in Russia rests on strong women. I think we should adopt that in the Senate. My colleagues are agreeing. I also want to echo Damon and Jim's comments about all of the people who helped in making this happen. Certainly, we're delighted to have the Slovenian ambassador to the United States here. Thank you for Slovenia's role. And I also appreciated your saying that one of the things that mattered to you was hearing from people when you were in prison about our support for what was happening to you and the support from people all over Russia. One of the things that I think is most important to remind us all is that we can make a difference, that every individual can stand up for what we believe in, just like those Russians standing there with that blank piece of paper. It makes a difference to stand up for what we believe. And your willingness to join with Yulia Navalny and to not just advocate on behalf of Russian prisoners, but recognizing the Belarusians that are wrongfully detained and imprisoned, and all of those around the world is such a statement for all of us who are in a free country to recognize the responsibility that we each have to ensure that we do what we can to try and free those people who are wrongfully imprisoned and suppressed around the world. So thank you for being the kind of model that we should all emulate. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Senator Shaheen. We now want to invite Senator Sheldon Whitehouse to the podium, the chair of the Senate Budget Committee. This is someone who has led the charge against Putin's kleptocracy in the Senate and served along with Vladimir Putin as pallbearers at John McCain's funeral. Senator.
I will be very brief. Point one, welcome back to freedom, Vladimir. Please don't go rushing off too soon. Point two, a ferocious woman is a beautiful thing to see, and no one was more ferocious than Yevgenia in pursuit of defending and freeing her beloved. So, and the third is just a word about Chairman Cardin, who is retiring from the Senate, but whose entire career in the Senate has been dedicated to fighting oligarchy, corruption, and kleptocracy from the early days of Magnitsky, when that seemed like it was a wild idea, It has now become the baseline off of which an enormous amount of other anti-kleptocratic infrastructure has been built and is operational. I constantly say that we actually are in a clash of civilizations, but we got it a little bit wrong. It's between kleptocracy and democracy, and in that clash, it's hard to think of anybody who has made a bigger contribution to the cause of democracy than Ben Cardin. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Senator Whitehouse, thank you very much. I want to call on Senator Chris Coons to come to the podium. He's the chair of the Select Committee on Ethics, the chair of the Appropriations Subcommittee on State, Foreign Ops, and Related Programs, but also the co-chair of the Senate Human Rights Caucus. And Vladimir had a chance to meet him when he was working on the designation of the Boris Nemtsov Plaza here in Washington, the first Democratic co-sponsor of that legislation. Senator.
Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Assistant Secretary, Ambassador, and to my colleagues. Vladimir, welcome home. It is such a joy to be with you, with your beautiful wife, with your talented and loving supporters from all over our nation and around the world. As you chose to go back to Russia, my heart was very heavy. As we've heard from Senator Cardin, many of us wondered whether we would ever see you again. But like so many others who have taken a similarly determined and brave stand, whether within Russia or to return to Russia, in other times and other places around the world when there was repression and authoritarianism, those who choose to challenge it publicly put themselves and their families at enormous risk. So let me just simply say, for the way that you challenge all of us to continue to believe, to hope for the possibility of peace, of openness, of democracy in Russia, thank you. To Evgenia and your family, who bore probably every bit as much the pain and the difficulty and the uncertainty of whether you would ever return again, and who turned that pain into purpose, and who has inspired so many others of the rest of us. Thank you. The first time I wrote a letter to a prisoner of conscience, I was a college student. There was a little table outside the dining hall at Amherst College asking us to write letters for someone who was in prison in a country I'm not sure I knew exactly where it was, but describing the conditions and the reasons why they were imprisoned. And years later, to have the chance to visit an American imprisoned in another country and to realize that our letters had gotten to that person, and then many years later to visit with him, with Senator Leahy after he'd been released, was to be reminded of the power of action and of gestures, even those that might seem small, like holding up a piece of paper or standing silently as Navalny's funeral procession passes, or challenging a powerful and brutal authoritarian. I just had the chance last week to meet with Evan Gershkovich, who is every bit as determined to get back to the work of journalism and everyday life as you are to getting back to the work of advocating for political prisoners and for reform in Russia. As you've reminded us today, Putin in his gulag holds not 700, maybe more like 1,300, or maybe untold prisoners. We must realize he does that, like all authoritarians, because he's afraid of his own people, afraid of accountability, afraid of the Ukrainians who just on the border of Russia are with determination and fierce love for their country standing up to him. Brave Russians who speak truth to power, brave Ukrainians who fight for freedom, Belarusians who continue to hope and dream and work for their own democracy, people throughout the whole region, in Moldova, in Georgia, and throughout the world. Vladimir Putin is afraid of what you've done and of what they do. So let's heed your message of hope and continue to believe in the possibility of change until every prisoner of conscience is released. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coons. I now want to turn to Representative Steve Cohen from my home state of Tennessee. He's the co-chair of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, but also the first ever special representative on political prisoners for the Parliamentary Assembly of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Vladimir's testified before your committee many times. Sir, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I don't have to say welcome back. I mean, everybody said it. Evgenia has been a star. One of your daughters spoke before our commission, and she was a star. so much wonderful work. I can't tell you the number of times I cursed to myself with my doors closed at the State Department for not taking action and declaring you wrongfully detained. But they were doing the work, and they always said you were at the top of their list and they were doing the work. So I had to accept that. I didn't like it. I wanted to write back and say, yes, we're going to have him wrongfully detained and we'll have him back on the next flight, BOAC. That's an old airline. But this is marvelous that you made it back. I didn't think we'd see you again. And there's a place I went to, I think it was in Norway, and it's called Hell. It's a very small little town. The biggest thing about it is the sign on the post office that says Hell. We can have your picture taken. I thought I'd been to hell and back. You've been to hell and back. Don't go again. I asked several people about it. I said, ask your wife. I said, why, as I'd asked you, don't go. And you said, I must go. I'm a Russian citizen. I'm a Russian, and we free into democratic Russia. She said, I couldn't ask him because I know what he would say. Don't do it again. Welcome back. You are a great, great, great hero of mine, and a hero, should be a hero of everybody's in the free world. And it's a wonderful day. Thank you.
We now want to invite Representative Bill Keating to the podium. He's the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Europe and also hosted Evgenia as his guest at the State of the Union. So please.
Thank you. And, around this building, we bump into people all the time. And probably the most common expression back and forth is, oh, it's great to see you again. This has a little more meaning today when we say it's great to see you again. And also, it'll be great as Chairman Cardin finishes his term, and he will not be deterred, I think, in the things he thought was so important. I'm sure around this building and elsewhere where people gather together on causes like this, we'll be saying to him, it's great to see you again, because I don't think that will end with his term. I just have a few images that quickly come to mind today. And first was, frankly, Vladimir, when you testified, when I invited you to the committee and you testified in 2020, and it was brilliant. You spun together clearly the KGB leadership and what they were doing, what they did in Georgia in 2008, what they did certainly in the assassination of Boris Nemtsov, what they did in 2016 in Crimea, and it was powerful. And I thought back to the voice you had when you were free and how important that was. Another image I wasn't privy to, not many of us were, but talking to people, it seemed so real. Can you imagine a person deprived of their freedom, with a daunting outlook of whether or not you'd ever see your family or be free again the rest of your life? It was the image, Vladimir, of you imprisoned, educating and sharing stories with other prisoners about the need to be resilient in democracy and to keep going forward. I don't think I could ever imagine being in that position and still bringing the candle forward for that. It speaks to how unique and impressive your commitment is to this cause and to humanity. Another quick image was on just recently, this past February, when Evgenia was my guest at the State of the Union, and how she was so powerful, how when she met the other people as they gathered, she brought the story home. And I must confess, the personal conversations we had then, I never fully understood just how much Putin despised Vladimir, how among the people that he hated, and it's a long list, that you were among the most hated, not because you're a hateful person, but because you were able to hit him where he couldn't hit back. You went to other people. You spoke to the mass. You spoke to the cause of democracy. And he had no retaliation for that, as much as he tried. And finally, an image that we all were so jubilant about, and I know Secretary O'Brien and the Biden administration, President Biden personally, Vice President Harris, everyone that worked so hard were there greeting people at the tarmac and seeing the people, not just yourself, but Paul Whelan, see Evan Gershkovich, and then the image, also of Alsu Kamasheva, and the other people that were there. And the joy that was there. But the anger I always felt, and I'm sure so many felt, at the injustice. Being a journalist is not a crime, except in places like Russia and other authoritarian types of nations, if you want to call them that. But you were there. And just a few minutes ago, you stood in front of all of us, and you said, thank you to all of us for everything we did, or you wouldn't be standing here. That's very humbling to hear. But I want to thank you, because if you weren't doing everything you were doing, the hope of freedom and democracy in Russia, for those that are still carrying it, those with the flowers, those with the candles, those who have died, like Alexei, that hope wouldn't be standing where it was if it wasn't for you. So thank you, thank your family, thank the administration, thank everyone that included you and the other people with you in their prayers. And I know that you wanted, one reason you were here today is let's not forget everyone else. Let's keep that same flame going. Let's keep that same hope alive. And when we see where you were, among the most despised by Putin, there's hope for all the others, and we will not let that hope die. And your courage, inspiration, will make sure that we're reminded of it, I'm sure, all the time. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative Keating. In the tradition of fierce Russian women, we're turning next to Natalia Arnaud, who is the founder and the president of the Free Russia Foundation. She has been a force of nature in support of the Russian democracy movement and political prisoners. Natalia.
Thank you. Thanks to Senator Cardin and his team for hosting us today. And in April, today it's a much happier occasion. Thanks to the entire U.S. Congress, U.S. administration for your efforts to release Vladimir and other political prisoners. This swap was a miracle, but it was possible thanks to collective efforts of so many people, organizations, governments. This swap is a victory, and release of Vladimir and Ilya Yashin and others is one step closer to democracy. And all of us have still a lot of work to do, because there are still a lot of people behind bars. Ukrainian POWs and civilian hostages, Belarusian political prisoners, Russian political prisoners. But why I said one step closer to democracy, because Vladimir, Evgenia, Anna, I'm a Russian, neither warmongering nor passive. We fight, we believe in democracy, we fight for democracy, and there are millions of us. Those who protest against the war and against the regime and get imprisoned for that, forced out of the country, or get murdered like Alexei Navalny or Boris Nemtsov. They help to find Ukrainian POWs and return them home. They find Ukrainian children and return them home. Then help young Russian men to avoid deployment to Ukraine. They speak loudly about atrocities of the Russian military or corruption of the Russian authorities. They homeschool their kids to avoid indoctrination. Their actions range in visibility and risk. But again, we are all Russians and we believe in democracy. We also support Ukraine, and we want Ukraine to prevail, because we believe that only military defeat of Putin in Ukraine it's the right thing, and also because it also gives us a chance for fundamental changes in Russia. And Vladimir, it's a great occasion, a remarkable gathering. Despite huge risks, he wasn't afraid to speak against the war, against Putin's regime. For that, he was sentenced to 25 years Stalin era sentence. He spent 2.5 years in torturous conditions. And his patriotism, his commitment to democracy, to Russia, to its people are unquestionable. He is a very powerful voice within the Russian community that resonates within the Russian community. But he is also a personal friend of all of you. And I hope from that position, he is a personified testimony that there are Russians worthy of democracy. There are Russians fighting for democracy. And those Russians need your help. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia. I next want to turn to Senator Roger Wicker, who is the ranking member of the U.S. Helsinki Commission, as well as the Senate Armed Services Committee, someone who pushed hard for Vladimir to be designated as wrongfully detained, but also Vladimir had a chance to first meet him when he came to Washington with Boris Nemtsov to advocate for the Magnitsky Act. Senator Wicker.
Hello. Vladimir, come up here. First time I ever saw you, you were with this man, Boris Nemtsov. 14 years ago. We lost to a Putin-backed assassin. We honor you back today on behalf of Boris Nemtsov and Navalny and Magnitsky and all the people that we've stood for. Help me hold this up if you don't mind. It says heroes do not die. I guess if we said it in Americanese, we'd say heroes heroes never die. But if you think about this guy that's helping me hold this poster up, this is the poster that was held during the funeral rallies after Boris Nemtsov was killed. If we read the slogan about Vladimir Kara-Murza, who's been poisoned twice and recovered twice, and who's been jailed with deprivation and kept in solitary confinement, we'd say heroes are hard to kill. And Vladimir Kara-Murza, thank God, was hard to kill. We don't want to try it again. So thank you so much, my friend. Thanks for bringing this person to our attention and calling attention to the hopes that we have. I had to step out for a moment. I was on the phone with some plans for high-ranking officials for a way that we can do even more as a United States government to defeat the Russian war crimes and restore sovereignty to our friends in Russia. Thank you for everything you've done, and thank you for hanging on a minute. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Senator Wicker. We're going to close today's program by turning to a wife, a mother, to someone who was thrust into the spotlight, who found her voice, who found her strength, and became not only an extraordinary, fierce advocate for Vladimir, but for all political prisoners, and indeed for Free Russia. Evgenia Kara-Murza is the Advocacy Director of the Free Russia Foundation, the founder of the October 30th Foundation. Evgenia, please.
Esteemed members of Congress, senators, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It's such a joy to be here today. The joy is immense. I see the man of my life, the father of my children, my best friend, my partner for life, my partner in crime as well, because I work for an undesirable organization. He's a foreign agent and a traitor. It's such a joy to see him back, to see him safe, relatively healthy, but standing tall, remaining strong, determined, committed. The best partner I could ever wish for. But at the same time, of course, I cannot but think about all the families, all the millions of families that are still torn apart by the war, by repression. I think about all the kids who don't get to hug their parents, of all the parents who are heartbroken about their kids being killed by Russian bombs or being thrown in prison because these parents raised them right. So the work will continue. The 30th of October Foundation that we created, thanks to Vladimir's idea, of course, it was his idea. He wrote to me from prison after receiving the Václav Havel Human Rights Prize, and he asked me what I would say if he donated that prize, the monetary part of it, to families of Russian political prisoners. He asked me to create this foundation and asked me my opinion of it, and I thought, oh my God, who's going to do that? And I said, yes, of course, I'm going to do this. And this is a very small thing that we can do right now to make sure that these families survive, that they have something to feed their kids with, that they can send their kids to school, that they can pay for medication, while their loved ones are being held behind bars for the only crime of standing up to a murderous regime and saying, no, I am not okay with this. So that fight will continue because Vladimir has made me into a fighter. Oh God, he's made me into a warrior. For years already, since the first poisoning, when I saw him in a coma, looking like an octopus because none of his major organs worked, I looked at him and I thought of the rage I was feeling inside against these people who, time and again, have been trying to destroy my family, my country, a neighboring country. So many millions of lives that have been affected, that have been destroyed by this regime in the Kremlin. So yes, if they want me to be a warrior, I'm going to be a warrior, I said to myself. And I'm going to get on the warpath. I'm going to put on this and my heels, and I'm going to get on the warpath, and I'm going to fight them, because I was not raised to just cower, to hide. I never liked bullies, never could stand bullies. So I will try to stand tall, as my husband has done for so many years. I will try to stay strong, as so many of my colleagues do, despite all the challenges, despite all the risks, despite harassment, despite all the attacks, they stay strong and they fight on. So we'll try to follow their example and do all of that. But we need your help in this. That amazing, amazing message of solidarity and support that this exchange sent to Russian civil society and to those political prisoners behind bars, it cannot be overestimated. Because this was a clear message to the Kremlin and to these political prisoners that we know who real criminals are, and we're going to stand with those who are fighting them with bravery, with courage, fighting them. So I want to thank you all for all the support and help that you've given me, for standing with us, for seeing that vision that Vladimir has been talking about for so many years, that vision of a different Russia, a Russia that will live, that will respect the rights of its own citizens and live in peace with its neighbors. That Russia that all these thousands of people behind bars and all these hundreds of thousands of people who were forced to flee the country, fear and persecution, all of these people represent that potential of a democratic, free Russia that will just become a normal European country. I want to thank you deeply, deeply from the bottom of my heart for all the support, for standing with us, for never wavering in your support, and for sending those very important messages of solidarity that help us, fight on. Thank you so very much. Thank you.
We want to thank Senator Cardin for hosting us, for your leadership on these issues. I also want to say in your presence the amazing staff of your committee, of your team, for supporting Evgenia, Vladimir, and the whole coalition. Thank you for your leadership, Senator.
Secretary O'Brien, thank you for keeping this program moving so smoothly. We're in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee room. There have been a lot of great moments in this room, speaking out on behalf of democracy and the values that America promotes globally. Today will go down as one of the greatest days in our committee. And we thank the two of you for the inspiration you are to all of us. Hope gives us the opportunity to make progress. We've made progress, but as the sign says, 700 plus are still being held. We are committed to work with you so that Russia will be free and those that are being held are released. Thank you again on behalf of all of us, and thank you all for participating in this program.